Yeah, so I'm going to talk about PHP's type system in all its glory, which is going to be sometimes gruesome. But yeah, so a bit about me. So you can find me like on Mastodon, like at Gearguess at PHP Social. I am also on Twitter, but if you need to ping me, I will also answer there, but I don't usually go there anymore. You can find me on GitHub. You can find me on my website, where you will have found something like the slides of this talk somewhat similar, not these exact slides. But yeah, so I studied pure mathematics at Imperial College London. I'm a PHP coder, financed part-time by the PHP Foundation. So if you are sponsoring the foundation, thank you. If not, do it. But not you, like your company. Personally, that's why it's more like companies, which is what is more important. So I care a lot about type systems in general, and I care about PHP semantics. And I do also like anime. I promise this is relevant for the end of the talk. So yeah, so this is what we're going to go through, so PHP's type system in general, subtyping and Liskov substitution principle, or LSP, which I think most people have heard vaguely, at least in part of Solid, which is DL. And then like type coercion, type juggling in PHP is going to be the third fun bit, like therapy for me, to be honest. So yeah, so PHP's type system. So a type system is a logical system comprising of a set of terms where you can assign a property. And this property is called a type. So in a programming language, like terms will be like variables or like properties of a class or various different things. And what the type system tells you, it tells you what you are allowed to do with the values and the terms. And so it dictates the operations you are allowed to perform on said type. So in PHP, we have things which we call like atomic types, so which are individual, like a single type basically. And we have like primitive types, we have like user-defined types, we have a couple of singleton types, the callable type, which is wonderful and annoying. Composite types, which allows you to compose multiple atomic types together in various ways. And then we have a couple of we have like one type alias in PHP as well. So yeah, so mixed is what in type theory parlance we call the universal type. So every type inhabits mixed. So everything is a subtype of mixed, although I know subtyping is later on, but it's difficult to write a talk. Resource is PHP's weird legacy type, which is just like, here's a blob of memory, which for the most part, we are trying to move away from resources to objects. So for example, in curl, like prior to, was it PHP 8.1 or PHP 8.0, you had you would have a resource. Now you get like a curl handle, which allows you to actually type a resource instead of like having, here's a blob of memory, try doing something with it. Oh, you can't. Well, disappointing. So objects, which I think everybody's familiar with because this is like the main thing we use in PHP. Array, which is loved godlike structure, which is everything and nothing. It's a hash table, it's a dictionary, it's a list, it's a vector. It's everything and nothing. We have PHP has four scalar types, so bool, int, and float, but also for some weird reason, strings we consider a scalar type, although it's a bunch of characters stringed together. Null is what we call the unit type. It's a type which has only one unique value. So the only value within the null type is the value null, which you can use since PHP 8.0, but previous to PHP 8.2, you could only use it as part of a union type and not a standalone. And never is what we call the empty type. So no value inhabits empty, or no value inhabits never, which you will use. So you can only use that as a return type, and you can basically use it to say it's like, okay, so this function always throws an exception, or always exits the program, or is an infinite loop. If, for example, in the event loop, the function of the event loop is basically never returns. So you could theoretically type this was empty. And then we have void, which exists in 7.1, which is kind of weird because in PHP, every function will return a value. So if you try to call a function which has like a return type of void, and you assign it to a variable, you will just get null. So void is kind of like null, just it does some weird compile check so that you can only do return and semicolon. Whereas if you do return something with null, you're forced to return null semicolon. This is basically the distinction, other than void doesn't fit in the usual subtyping semantics. So yeah, so user-defined types. So we also call them class types, which is basically what you probably all are familiar with, is interfaces, classes, and since 8.1 enumerations, which allows you to define your own domain logic and domain semantics. We have these three relative class types, which are called self, parent, and static, which refer to within your class, within the hierarchy. So you can do something weird. So for example, you can have a return type of parent. I don't know why you would do this, but you can do that. Same thing, you can have an argument type as parent. Again, don't do that. It just exists for weird reasons. Self and static are actually somewhat useful. So static is only available since 8.1, and you can only use that as a return type. And it basically tells you that the instance this method returns is part of the class it was called on. So yeah. So singleton types. So a singleton type is a concrete subtype of a more general type. So in PHP, we have two of them. We have false and true. So false is since PHP 8.0 and has the same caveat as null, in that you can only use it as part of a union type prior to PHP 8.2. And yeah, true just exists since then. So the main reason why they exist is, for two reasons, is PHP encodes true and false individually instead of like doing a lookup on a Boolean. But also a lot of PHP function either return something or false. And since PHP 8.0 already converted a lot of e-warnings to value errors, a lot of functions just return always true nowadays. So this allows you to basically, if you have a function which only have like this single return type, you can basically know, oh, okay, you don't need to care about the return type in some sense. It makes it somewhat similar to if you had like null or void. So you can't currently define a singleton type in PHP. If you want to have like a set of fixed values within a type, just use an enumeration. That's what they're basically for. So yeah, the callable type. Lovely callable type. So the callable type represents a function in PHP. And you can represent a function by a string of characters. So like sterlen will refer to the function sterlen if you call this with like parentheses and arguments. Or an object method pair, so you can have like an instance as the first part of the key, like at the first index, the first element of your array, and then the method name as the second one, and that will call the method of that, like that instance of the object with the parameter you give them. An object which implements invoke, so like the magic method, which basically means that you can just call the object like a function. Or what you probably should do if you're like on 8.1 is to use the new syntax which will give you a closure, which is using sterlen, like open the brackets and then 3 dots. The 3 dots are part of the syntax. They're not just here to say like, oh, fill in the blanks. No, this is part of the syntax. It will give you the closure which represents the sterlen function. Now, the one caveat with callable is that you cannot use it as a type property because there are like some weird scoping issues in the sense like where does the closure reside. So if you actually want to store a function in a type property, just use closure and then fetch the closure with the new syntax. So yeah, so composite types. So composite types allow you to combine multiple types, multiple atomic types. So intersection types, which allow you to say, I want something to be something of type A and of type B at the same time, which is exists since 8.1. Simple union types, which say, oh, I want something of type T or of type U. So two different types. This exists since 8.0 formally, although you could have nullable types in 7.1 with the question mark, which basically means T or null. So yeah, and so DNF types basically allows us to combine union types with intersection types, and DNF stands for disjunctive normal form, which is basically a Massey term, which is a canonical normal form, which is a list of ors where you have some ands in between. So basically the brackets here says like, okay, I have X and Y, or V and W. The reason why we do this and why we force you as the developer to do it is A, because it makes life easier to implement, because I implemented this and it took me ages. Secondly, you get into this weird problem of like trying to normalize types, and turns out it's not deterministic. So then you get into the weird like halting problem. Is like, will my program compile and ever terminate? Which is not a fun problem to have. So yeah, so that's basically why we currently force you to like write the types in this form. So why do we actually care about composite types? So here I'm taking C to be represent like the countable interface, T to represent traversable, array to just be like array, obviously, and C and T means like a type which is countable and traversable at the same time. So if we have like the whole, like, let's say this is our type universe, we will have some types which are only countable, some types which are only traversable, and some which are both at the same time. And the key point is that when you have an intersection type, it means that you can use the API of countable and traversable in this instance. If I have something which is of type countable and traversable, I can, well, use the count function, and I can also for each and iterate over this object. Where if I only have an object which is countable, basically the only thing it tells me is just like, oh, I can call count on it, nothing else. And if I have an object which is just traversable, I can just iterate through it. Tying these two interfaces together basically gives you access to all of the APIs that the interfaces implement. And the reason why we care about DNF types is that if you replace here like C and T, like as countable and traversable or array, is that, which means like, oh, I want this thing and that. In this weird thing, it's because like an array, you can also count it and you can traverse it, but because it's not an object, it can't implement interfaces. So this allows you to say, oh, I want something to be this so that I can count and traverse it, but also I can do the same thing with an array. So I don't really care what actually the underlying type is. And this is not just useful for like countable and like traversable and array. It can allow you to like migrate APIs if you're from one thing and it's being like, well, I want this, but I need to deal with this legacy representation or like this legacy library which like uses something different, but they fundamentally work the same. This is what union types allow you. So yeah, intersection of types gives us access to every single API which is provided by every type, whereas the union of types only gives us access to the common denominator, so the common APIs between each of the types. So yeah. Type aliases. So as of PHP 8.2, iterable is actually a type alias which is resolved at compile time to be traversable or array. Prior to that, it was its own kind of weird primitive type, which was handled especially within the engine, and it made kind of everything a bit clunky. The one caveat is that you cannot currently define type aliases in userland, so you need to write in your types, like long types, on your own, which hopefully we'll figure out at one point how to do. But yeah, so a bit of C code. So within the engine, every single variable of value is represented as a zval, which stands for Zend value because the engine is called Zend, which basically just has like the value, which might be like an object or an array or an integer or whatever, and a field which is like the type info. And it will basically, this type info like holds to say it's like, oh, is this like null? Is this also false or true? The reason why we encode false or true this way is so that prevents us doing a lookup of saying like, okay, this is a Boolean. Okay, what's the value of the Boolean? We just know it immediately, which like allows for a bunch of optimization within the engine. And yeah, so that's how values are stored and how we do type checking on a general type. Otherwise, within the engine, we have this struct which is called a Zend type, which represents types in reflection or doing inheritance. And it basically has like a void pointer, which basically in C means here's a pointer to a bunch of memory you know what you're doing with, which is slightly annoying, but whatever. And a type mask, which is a BIS mask of basically the previous values for built-in types, so that we can easily check them like this. And the pointer is either a class name, which is handled as a string, or as a list of types, which, yeah, is that, which basically holds an array of types. So yeah, so subtyping and Liskov substitution principle. So subtyping in programming language theory is a form of type polymorphism, which basically means that you can substitute, if something is a subtype of something else, it means that you can replace every single instance of the parent type by an instance of the subtype in a way that nothing breaks. So yeah, the mastery word is like S is a subtype of T, which is written in 3 different ways depending on which book you go. It's either just the bracket with the dots, it's this weird square thing, or it's just the same thing with an equal sign. But always like these 2 dots. So that's like how you can write the relationship, and you will see it some in like logic books. It means that any type of type S can safely be used in any context where you would expect something of type T. So Liskov substitution problem, or LSP, is a particular definition of subtyping, which is called strong behavioral subtyping, and it was formulated by Barbara Liskov and Janet Wing in 1994, so by people who are way smarter than me. And the succinct formulation is, let phi of x be a property provable about object x of type T, then phi of y should be true for objects y of type S, where S is a subtype of T. Now, what the fuck does this mean? Basically, it's like I said, it's like, okay, I can replace a type with something else in a way that nothing breaks and my behavior is consistent. Which basically means preconditions cannot be strengthened in the subtype, postconditions cannot be weakened, invariance must be preserved, and there's this weird thing specifically to the Liskov substitution problem, which is called the history rule, which means that constraints must be preserved in the subtype. The first 3 conditions, basically the PHP engine will take care of, because this is when you will get like type violation or like the whole thing about co and contravariance. The history rule is the one thing that you need to take care of. And one way of explaining this is if you have a robot which has a method which is like move, and it just goes like Y in one direction and Z in another, and you implement the method run, and instead of calling the walk method or the move method, you just like directly impact on the parameters, you are violating the history rule. Because if somebody else implements a method based on move or re-implements move in a different way, then your run will conflict with the change in move. It's the most complicated bit of this thing and like the most hardest, so yeah. Another way of visualizing LSP is just as a data pipeline. LSP is not really about the class hierarchy itself, but it's with the interaction before and after. Now, obviously, so if I have data and I accept something wider, then obviously everything is fine. And if I give something more specific, then all of the data afterward is like built in such a way to handle the cases that you stop emitting. Whereas if you do the other way around, where like you're being more restrictive and emitting more data, then your code is not going to expect these new values. This is, I think, the core principle of like ALSP and like subtyping in general, is that like you respect the top bit, that you make everything larger in inputs and you give a more restricted or like specific output. So yeah. So basically what LSP does on signatures is on methods you cannot add mandatory parameters. The parameter types must be contravariant, i.e. it must be a supertype. The return type must be covariant, i.e. a subtype. And then property types must be co and contravariant. The reason why I say co and contravariant instead of invariant here is that it has a bit to do again with type normalization, is that you can have 2 types within a child or like within a class hierarchy which are not exactly the same like written out, but they will resolve to the same like space. Therefore, they are compatible. So yeah, covariance of type. So in general, S is a subtype of T if S intersects with a new type U, or if you remove a type Ti from a union of types T up to, from T1 up to Tn. So yeah, it's like, okay, I have like public function foo, I've got a bunch of types in a union type. Well, I'll make it more specific if I just remove a bunch of like of the union types. Similarly, if I have an intersection, if I just add more requirements, it's just like, okay, I want something of A and B. and I'm giving you something which is A and B and C and D, it's more specific. Therefore, this is also a subtype. But it is not always the case. You can have like these things where, for example, so I say I want something which is of interface A, and I have two concrete classes, X and Y, which implement A. Now, a union of X and Y is a subtype of A, because if you look as A as our universe, like our type universe, well, X and Y reside within it, even though they are like not the same, but they reside within A. Similarly, with intersections, if I have X and Y which implement both A and B, well, okay, I have A, I have B, I have the intersection, but I'm also saying that X and Y reside in this intersection. So I'm even more constraining on what I'm returning. Yeah. And then it's just like mixing up something. It's like I can mix intersection types with a union type, and then be like, okay, the A and B, well, X and Y is a subtype of that, therefore X, Y, and D is a subtype of the previous thing. And yeah, similarly, it also works the other way. With the A and B, well, I can drop A and have X be a subtype of A and just constrain on X. And those are all different subtypes. So yeah. Now, what's the future of PHP system, type system? So this is nothing as formalized or written or IFCs or anything, but these are ideas that may happen at one time in PHP. So function types, which basically tell you it's like, oh, instead of just having a like general callable, which have no idea of how many arguments to take, what it returns as an output, I'm constraining things like, okay, I want a function which has as its first argument an integer, which takes an integer, as its second one's a string, and I return a boolean. And this is what I want to have as my function and as my callable. Something else, generics, I don't know if people know a bunch about this, which is basically template types in C++, or they have various different names, which is instead of needing to create, for example, a collection of cats and a collection of dogs, I can just have a generic class collection, which I will specify which type I wanted, and it guarantees me that, okay, I can only add cats to a collection of cats, and I can't add a dog. So yeah. User-defined type aliases, I did say a bit before, like it would be probably nice to have something like this for long types, especially DNF types, or function types as well, because always needing to write this for every single method or every single return type, it's probably going to get boring quite quickly. So like type aliases will be very useful for that. And another concept would be in-out parameters. So in-out parameters basically are an improvement on references that currently exist in PHP. So for example, as an in-out parameter of array, I could say, well, I want a reference of an array, but also you guarantee me that at the end of the function, this still remains an array. Currently in PHP, no, I didn't do that. I removed that example. Oh, probably should add it back. If you add this, if you drop this and you just had like the ampersand in front of the variable to make it a reference, this code would just be fine. As in, okay, I take an array as an input, but then my function just converts this to an integer, and outside the scope of the function, a would be an integer. And in this case, trying to modify this would give you a type error because you're changing the expectancy of like the input. So yeah, so type coercion. So after all of this very difficult talk and stuff, I promise this is going to be the fun bit. This is probably how I'm going to be looking somewhat, because it does drive me somewhat insane. So yeah, just a quick audience question. You just need to raise your hands. I'm not actually asking you to like shout or something like that. Who has heard about strict types? Most people. Who knows what strict types does? Okay, a couple of people have a vague idea. But let's answer. So PHP has 10 type juggling contexts. And we will go through all of them. You will bear with me. So the string type juggling context is really the easiest to understand. It's every time you just try to print a variable with echo, or print R, or do string concatenation, or whatever. Weird stuff can happen. So true will get cast to 1, and yeah, so I'll get 1 hello. Arrays, for some reason, just get converted to array with a capital A, because that's somewhat sensible. And the one thing which is actually sensible is that if you have an object which doesn't implement the toString magic method, it throws a type error. Like, that's great. At least PHP is somewhat sane sometimes. But yeah, so integral and string type juggling context. So this is when you use bitwise operators. So they either deal with strings or with integers. So if you just deal with strings, it will do like byte by byte, like it will do like an OR, like a bitwise OR. So that's somewhat sensible. Now, if you're trying to do something with an integer and like your string is numeric, then it casts the string to an integer and it will just do the bitwise with numbers. PHP has this notion of numeric strings in scientific notation. So 1 E3 is equal to 1,000, which leads to, yeah, great. Well, true gets casted to 1, like null gets casted to 0, okay, that's fine. So the thing is, like, internal objects or objects which are defined by extension can actually define their own operator overloading or like their own casts. So GMP, which allows you to work with arbitrary precision integers, overloads like all of the standard mass operations. So you can just do 36 bitwise with an object, and it will give you another instance of the object with the new value. That one surprised me, like tidy parse string. The tidy extension is this extension which is meant to sanit or clean up or tidy up like HTML files or XML files or whatever. And for some weird reason, it just defines an integer cast. So you can like do a bitwise operation with the object because it just casts the object to 0 and then it will allow it to do, and because that's totally reasonable. But yeah, in all other cases, when like objects are not being weird, you won't actually get a type error. So if you're trying to do a bitwise operation with 36 with a string which makes no sense, then you actually get a type error. Numeric type juggling context is kind of similar, but it's just like with addition, multiplication, and all of the usual arithmetic, with the change that it wants something which is an integer or a float. So yeah, you try to add like these two numbers, which are strings, it will just give you a float. Similarly with all of the other things. GMP and tidy, again, basically the same, just with addition and multiplication and all of these things. So the logical type juggling context. So this is when you basically use like an if condition or like a ternary operator or a logic operator. Now, surely every single value in PHP has a Boolean representation, and if you use it in an if, nothing breaks. Except it does, because GMP overloads its cast, but doesn't support a Boolean cast, so the engine doesn't know what to do with it and just bails out. Why? Why are you doing this? Yeah. So this recoverable fatal error, I don't know if people remember from PHP 5 error before the engine actually threw exceptions. It threw a bunch of recoverable fatal errors, which you could hook in with the error handler and then do some stuff with it. Currently, this is the only instance where this error still happens. And I haven't figured out how to fix it because it's really, really difficult, because basically the engine assumes the logical thing that you can just cast stuff to a Boolean. So yeah, that's fun. Oh yeah, that was me the first time I realized it. I was like, what the fuck? So yeah, the comparative context. So this is basically when you're using the comparisons operators. Now I didn't know if you knew, but PHP has two different operators. The normal exclamation mark with the equal, or the two brackets, angle brackets, which apparently is the official SQL syntax to say different compared to this thing. But so you've learned something new. And this is the table of how it does type juggling, which is present on the PHP.NET documentation. So I've retyped this and converted it. So if you try to convert a string with a string, it will convert null to the empty string, and then it will do a numerical or a lexical comparison. The numerical bit is going to be the surprising one, I feel. If you try to compare anything to Boolean or null, it will convert both sides to Boolean if it can, and then it will do false is less than true, because false is 0, true is 1. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I suppose that's somewhat reasonable. So objects, so again, built-in classes can define their own comparisons. I think, is it date time or date period? Allows you, or date time interval, allows you to compare the objects with each other. Otherwise, same classes compare properties, otherwise they're considered incomparable. If you try to compare a string of resources into a float with each other, it will just translate the strings and resources to numbers, and then you do usual math. This is technically not true since 8.0, because we made this somewhat more sensible, in that if the string is not numeric, it will cast the integer to a string, but again, the docs are not up to date, because documentation is hard. You can also compare arrays, so an array with fewer members is smaller. If a key from the first array is not found in the second, then they are considered uncomparable, and it will compare stuff by value. Objects against anything else, object is considered always greater, and array against everything else, array is always greater. So this is what the docs actually say and what we should expect, which has these weird implications. So you can compare logically an empty array to a true. This is basically what we always do if we do like if empty array or something like that, or if variable. But also you can have two strings if they're numbers. It just casts the strings to integers and it compares them to be equal. So 1 is equal to the string 0, 1. But then also again was the like exponential notation. It's like, okay, 0e5, it's like 0 to whatever power is still 0. 0e9, okay, still 0, so those are also the same. Now, the array and the objects here is just the way PHP indicates you that like two values are incomparable, is that like it will tell you, okay, operand 1 is always greater even if you flip them, meaning what you're getting is complete nonsense. So yeah, so this is what is implied. But it doesn't always work. So if you try to compare two internal objects, well, standard class defines its own comparator like method, so we will use that instead of the one of GMP. But if you flip the order, it will try to use the one defined by the GMP object, which tries to cast the other operand to an integer or to a number, and it get a type error, which is great. It's fun. But also, sometimes like it tries to convert objects to integers. Like I haven't, like why? And again, like tidy, it casts it to like 0 because it does like numerical stuff just fine. And yeah, again, like GMP also a bit weird object. If you ever want to like battle proof like a library or something with like how does it behave with object, just throw the GMP object and you'll see how that goes. So yeah, okay, function type juggling context. So this is the context when you define, like as a function, you define like times for your parameters or your return type, or you type your properties. And in this context, the value must be a value of the type, except three exceptions. So int to float promotions, so an int will always get promoted to a float. If the type and the value are scalars, the value gets converted to the appropriate type if compatible. And the string type accepts objects that are castable to strings. Small note as well is internal functions prior to 8.1 also just willy-nilly converted null to a scalar. This is now deprecated as 8.1 and is apparently everybody's nightmare. So yeah, so int to float, you have something with float, you pass it 15, it will just like convert this to a float, no biggie. If you have multiple types, like scalar types, like an union type, it will go in the following order. It will first try to interpret it as an integer, then as a float, then as a string, and then finally as a Boolean. There has this weird implication that like if you have a function which accepts integer or string, and you pass it a float, currently it gets interpreted as an integer because it will just truncate the float to an integer. But the moment this becomes a type error, the float will get converted to a string. So if you ever have, I don't know why you would do this, but if you have code which does this, be aware of that. And then there's again an exception to the exception, which is that if you pass in a string to a parameter which defines integer or float, it will use the usual like numeric string semantics to decide what the destination of the type is. So if you have a float as a string, it will convert it to a float. If you have as an integer, it will convert it to an integer. So yeah. Now, string castable objects. So yeah, so it's a function which implements the toString method, and it will just like, you accept it as a string and you pass it, it will just convert the object to a string calling the method. Except, not necessarily. GMP, our lovely, hateful child, again, implements the string cast, but does not actually implement the toString method, therefore does not implement the stringable interface, but it will still cast stuff to a string, like, just on its own, which is great. It's amazing. It's super fun. Okay, increment and decrement operators. So this is very easy. You just have like you take a value and you increment it and you get like the next value, or you decrement it and you get the value before it. So with integers and floats, it just does +1 or -1. Except PHP has this concept of a string increment, which it stole from Perl, like 20 years ago, and decided this is a good idea. So you can also increment strings, which basically do what like Excel column stuff. So when you get with Z, it will increment Z to A, and it will have a carry, and this will carry on to the, so yeah, so DZ +1 gives you EA. Well, yeah. But if you try to use like an increment or decrement with an array or an object or like a resource, like that doesn't make any sense, right? Like you can't increment an array, you can't increment a resource, like what are you doing? So you actually get like type errors, which is nice. But you don't if you use Booleans. Like, it doesn't even do anything to the Boolean. It's like, okay, increment my Boolean. It's like, no, I don't want to. Decrement my Boolean? Nah, don't want to. So, and it doesn't warn. Like, it's just like, you could be thinking that you have like an integer here and that you're expecting it. Like, no. It doesn't do anything, just bites you. But it also has this thing with like the string. Like if the string is numeric, then it casts the string to an integer or to a float, and then it increments it normally. Like, that's somewhat reasonable, I think. Like compared with everything else, that's like actually reasonable. And again, like GMP overloads its object handler, so you can do increment to the object, but for some reason you can't increment tidy, although you could do like O +1 earlier, but you can't increment it. I stopped trying to understand this at one point. So yeah, null. Surely, like, okay, most of the time, like, null gets converted to 0 and you do stuff and everything. So when you're trying to decrement null, you just get null. No warnings, nothing happens, you just get null. If you try to increment it, you get 1, which is consistent. Why are you doing this? So again, so the strings, like, you can only increment them. So if you try to decrement a string, it doesn't do anything to it, except if it's the empty string, because it then converts like the empty string to 0, and then it does -1, so you get -1. But if you try to increment it, like, okay, foo gives us like fop, fair enough, but the empty string gives us the string 1. It doesn't give us an integer, it gives us a string, which if you try to increment it afterwards once again, then you get an integer. Why are you doing this? Why? Okay, you know, whatever. But the string increment also just only works with ASCII strings. So if you try to increment like an E, like this French character, like, it doesn't do anything. And the carry also is kind of broken. So okay, if you have no leading and trailing spaces, it just works like well when as intended. Okay, Z becomes like AA. But if you have a trailing white space, it just ignores it, and you still have Z. But if you have a leading white space, it just loses the carry. Like, it's like, okay, sure, Z or +1, okay, that becomes A, and like I'm trying to go through, and it's like, oh, I can't give my carry anymore, so it just disappears into the abyss, like my sanity. But anyway, logically, You know, okay, it's string increments and like whatever, but like, okay, if I increment a string, then I definitely get a string at the end, right? Right? So what happens is, oh yeah, the first time, what, why? So what happens is at one point during the incrementation, you get to the step which is 5d9, and then when you increment it, you get the string 5e0, and 5e0 is a string in exponential notation. Therefore, on the next iteration, it casts it to an int or to a float, and then it increments the float. And so we went from strings to floats, which had nothing to look like numbers. Whatever. Okay, so array offsets. So the array offsets are mostly reasonable, in that, like, okay, you can have like an integer like key, you can have a string key, you can have a string key which is just an integer, or you can have it with like a bunch of leading numbers. You can also have an empty key. I don't know why you would want this an array with an empty key, but it works. So the integer string gets converted to an integer, but only the integer string. So 007 like still remains 007, but yeah, like 2 as a string gets converted to 2 as an integer, which, yeah, fine. Normally, when you have null and you cast it to, in the context where it gets cast to like either an integer or a string, like usually it gets cast to an integer, except here, like for some reason null gets cast to like the empty string, and this is, you get like an empty, like the empty key. And false and true actually are somewhat sensible here. So that's like, okay, false is 0, true is 1, sure, whatever, that's just normal. Floating point numbers, so if it's an actual floating point number, it will get truncated to 15, otherwise the string just remains as it is. But with the truncation, you will get like a deprecation notice to at least make you aware that you're losing some data somewhere. Resources, for some reason you can use a resource as an index. I don't know why you would ever do this, but sure, feel free. Now, at least you can't use an array as an array offset. Like, that makes no sense. So you get a type error, and similarly with object. And the object doesn't care that it is stringable and implements toString or whatever. It's like you can never use an object as an array offset. Like, it will not cast a string to like the object to a string to like get the string representation of the object. So that you would need to do it manually, which is actually reasonable and somewhat nice for one from PHP instead of all of the other shenanigans it does. So yeah, like, and it has the same behavior on axis when you're trying to unset. It's like, okay, like it will just cast the stuff to an integer and it's fine, and you will get like type errors, and you know, at least reasonably well behaved. And it does the same with like isset or like, yeah. So you can actually have a type error if you do use isset, and if you do something weird like that. But otherwise, you know, actually somewhat sensible and telling you that you're having a programming error. Oh, and yeah, obviously ternary operator behaves as well, identically. I forgot I had so many slides. So string offsets, so you have like a character, or like a bunch of characters, and you can just say, oh, I want the 6 byte. So strings in PHP are not actually like the strings of characters. It won't do like an actual grapheme cluster. It will just work on an individual byte. So yeah, like here, like the 6th letter, or the 7th letter, because the index starts at 0, is G, which is my initial. So, you know, that's why I chose it. As the example, so null gets converted to 0, so you get A. False gets converted to 0, you get A. True gets converted to 1, you get A. But you get a warning. Like, PHP just gives you a warning all the time, which is kind of surprising, instead of just type juggling stuff randomly without telling you. It will just warn all the time. And it will also do that with like floating point numbers which are compatible with integers. So 8.0 also gets converted to 8, but warns. Same with 8.6, which is truncated. Except if you use a numeric string, kind of. Like if it's an integer, it will do the cast to an integer fine. If it's a float, it will just type error, which, I mean, is kind of nice. Because, yeah, trying to access an offset of type string on a string, like, that makes no sense. And yeah, and it does this with actually like arrays. It also does this with resources. It does this with objects. You know, it's like, nice, okay, type errors all the way, great. I'm all for it. Also, you can't unset a string, like an offset of a string. Like, what would this mean? It's like, are you just like truncating your string from one thing? So, you know, okay, error, perfect sense, makes sense. Except the type, like the error messages depending on context and how many like nested things and how many offsets you use, but at least you get like errors, you know, that's reasonable. Except with if set and empty, now everything's just silent and it will gladly just like cast stuff for you, like on your own, which is just like, okay, like, but you will get like, again, like some deprecation notices if you like cast like floats. And yeah, and it will just happy willy just like accept any dumb value you just give it to it. However, with the ternary, then it starts type erroring again, which is brilliantly consistent, as PHP does, which makes me cry every single time. So yeah, finally, we'll get to the end. We're getting to the end here. So exit either accepts an integer or a string. And exit is a language construct, because obviously it can't be a normal function because that allows you to exit the program. So if you give it an integer, it will process the exit with like a status code, and if you give it a string, it will just like print the string to the console and just leave. But like, it is very specific on what it accepts. So if it's not an integer, then it will interpret exit as a string. So null gets converted to an empty string, false gets converted to an empty string, true gets converted to the string 1, floats get converted to like whatever string. This kind of like took me a while to figure out because I had like a bug on a CI script that I wrote, because I was just like, oh yeah, I'll just track my errors with a Boolean variable and I'll just like pass the Boolean value to like exit. And like if everything's fine, like if there's no error, I have false, which gets converted to 0, so status code okay. If it's true, there's an error, it gets converted to status code 1, therefore it fails CI. But no, because it always just converts stuff to a string, it just fails CI all the time. Which was a fun 3 hours of my life trying to figure this out. So yeah, you just need to like force to cast him an integer if you want this. But yeah, what also happens is that it will just try to cast whatever you want to a string. So you can pass it an array, and it will just print the warning and the actual thing to the terminal. And you can also just print like a resource. I don't know why you will do this, but you can. But what is really funny with that is that if your conversion throws a type error, you can catch the type error and then dodge the exit, which is pretty funny. So yeah. So after we went through, like I don't hope I've bored you too much with all of this. So out of these 10 type juggling contexts, strict types only affect the function type juggling context. None of the other ones. Like only this narrow, specific case compared out of all of these things. So it is also only enabled on like PHP script that use declare strict types, and it disables coercions of scalar types in the following cases only. So arguments passed to functions which are made in userland, return values for user-defined functions, value assignment to a type property. That's it. That's the only case where strict type actually does anything useful. So strict type does not change the behavior of the binary operation, so I can still like mix and match like strings with integers, or concatenate like ridiculous variables together. It also does not affect comparison operators. So like my 1 is equal to 0, 0, 1, that still works. It doesn't do anything else. Yeah, that's just like octal notation. I don't know why I put that example here. But yeah. It also does not change the behavior of exit. So yeah, exit true, like still prints like a string, but just doesn't even warn about anything. But I think like the most important thing that you need to be aware of is that strict type does not affect the behavior of functions which are called by the engine. So if, for example, if you try to filter an array with your own callable, which says that, oh, it only accepts integers and it always returns a Boolean, which you are forced to do and like satisfy everything, the engine, while calling your closure, will completely ignore strict types. Therefore, your array, even though it's filtered with your own callable, which has like strict types and everything enabled, you will get an output which can have like values which are not at all integers in this case. And I think this is like the key point that needs to be remembered, because if you would implement like a user-defined version of area filter and you have strict types, you would get type errors immediately. But like the engine will just like happily do it on its own. So yeah, so that's the hot take. Strict type kind of was a mistake in that it's a very good bandage of trying to ignore problems and not being aware, instead of us actually fixing the problems within the engine. So yeah, thank you. Ooh, that looks terrible on this projector. Oh, I didn't, okay, that's the feedback from my talk 3 weeks ago, so that QR code doesn't work. But yeah, so yeah, again, you can find me on Mastodon, Twitter, or on my website, or on GitHub, or yada, yada, yada. So if you have any questions, or afterwards in the pub, or now, but yeah. Have a look. Yes?
Are there actually test cases, like PHP test cases for some of those bizarre behaviors?
I actually don't know. I mean, I think some of them do definitely have. I did go mad while doing some of this stuff. Like, I initially dove into this whole thing when I was looking into like the increment and decrement stuff and to try to make it somewhat more sensible. And I just then went into other stuff and saw, how can I make PHP do weird stuff? And yeah, but I think, yeah, there are some test cases where, like, I know like the comparison operators like definitely will have like some test cases which will be like, yep, this makes sense for a definition of makes sense. So yeah. Yeah, sure.
Going all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about types.
Yep.
So PHP 8.2 introduces, I think, false or true and false as a
Yep.
type. Can you do or any plans to do definable literal types? So I'll be able to do string, particular string.
So I've actually been thinking about that. I don't think it's too difficult to implement. I mean, in the sense that like I know what I'm doing and I know the aspect of the engine which needs to be gets touched. I don't know how many people will like this as an idea, because like a lot of people it's just like, well, if you just want like a set of like closed values, just use an enum, which for a lot of cases does make sense. But I have kind of shifted. Initially, I was also very dead against like singleton types. I've kind of changed my opinion on that. I think that like you can do like some pretty interesting and neat stuff with singleton types on like more on a compile time level. And I don't know if it like would possibly like help with some optimizations, knowing that like, okay, like this function can only return these 3 set of values. But I'm not smart enough to like do stuff with opcache. Opcache is too complicated for me. So I know some of the people who might be able to do stuff with it, but yeah, I have thought about it. I don't know if I'll get it done for 8.4 because 8.3 feature freezes in like in a month and a half, like mid-July. Yeah. Oh, I need to put stuff into voting. Oh, I need to work. But yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's no coercion issue with functions.
Yeah.
I've looked at that case, and I would say it causes quite a bit of problems.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's not going to be any other RFCs or anything before they become a type error in 9.
Yeah, but I don't know when 9 is going to come out. Like it could be like in 2 years, it could be in 3 years, it could be in 4 years. I don't think so, though. Well, I think like the difficulty is that like it was always documented that way. It's PHP just became more rigorous in like what it accepted. Is like prior to PHP 8, it didn't always throw type errors if you passed in invalid stuff. Like it would just sometimes it would return null, sometimes it would return false, and within internals we considered this was the one case where we considered this to be undefined behavior. In the same thing where you're trying to like compare stuff between each other, we kind of considered this to be undefined behavior. Like it's whatever, dragons be unleashed, dragons be done, you know. And I think it's it basically does show there's a bunch of like sloppy code, and yeah, you need to add like a bunch of no code, I think like operators everywhere, but Yeah.
Makes things better.
No, I mean like, yeah, like doing forcing like string casts or like not like integer casts is like, in my opinion, the worst thing to do because like you're actually hiding bugs.
To avoid which is code breaking, that has caused, that's the solution I decided to go down. I think it's making it worse.
Yeah.
So
Which,
the fix that you put in, it's like that's the fix, as in to type, but within the process of type error.
yeah.
I think it's going to make things worse.
The difficulty with that is that like we're trying to align engine behavior with user land behavior.
Yeah, but you can't avoid the odd one because it
Yeah, but it's the sensible one. Like,
one case, so you can either have a completely strict language, and then you don't convert integer 100 to a string when you do strlen.
yeah.
So you break all that, or you do have some coercion, of which none have been coerced for years, or forever.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is like I can't go back 20 years in time and like whip people's ass and be like, what you did was dumb. Like I do like a lot of difficulty is I think like obviously as like a new contributor to internals is that like you look back at some discussions from like I mean again like the thing with like strict types is like when strict types was talking on and about like there was like a competing RFC by Zend and other people like Zend and a bunch of other separate people but mostly from Zen, which is basically what I'm currently doing in PHP 8, which is like tighten up like all of the coercions. It would have been like, okay, so like floating points which have like which have a fractional park get deprecated to stop get converting to integers without anything. Like you can't convert integers, you can't convert strings or booleans to strings anymore, or like a bunch of different stuff. For some reason, the community decided it was a bad idea, and instead just go with strict types and like. Let's just ignore these problems within the language. And I think it's just like, yeah, it's like the current like Rostov maintainers just thinks like this is what we should work on. And I mean, to be fair, that IFC again, like that converting like deprecating null coercions, like again, that was done by Nikita, which
The thing I'm worried about is we're going to get to PHP 9, and if people start grading to it, and that's going to be different. You're going to have because it's like you've got a large code base.
yeah.
You can't find these. They're not findable. Static analysis doesn't do it, and most people don't use static analysis.
Sure. I mean, static analysis can find some of these, but yeah.
If your code starts to run enough, and you either have the massified SDR lab everywhere, not great, or people stick with the old version, they sort of have almost ready to. So I'm concerned from a security point of view that people who are sitting around like they're on PHP 7.4.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't really think like that much. Like, PHP 7.4 is still supported. Like, sure, it's not supported from us, but it is supported by, like, just pay like Zend or pay Red Hat. Like, the thing is, like, the difficulty is, like obviously enterprise has its different set of priorities and wants the language to be something, but the people, like a lot of different people within the community want the language to be something slightly different. And
Everything you talked about today, I'm thoughtful.
yeah.
Really good, because you've got some really weird expertise.
Yeah, I mean, that,
Fantastic job of going for weeks.
yeah.
Like really special. I just find that null coercion is sort of lost. Because we have a framework that turns null when they get things from the query strings, the form fields, data.
Yeah, but
Null is everywhere.
yeah, but the thing is, like, no one has, like, obviously I'm coming more from like the purest mathematical background side here, but like null is not the same as an empty string. Like null has its own meaning. It's the meaning of like I have no data, I do not know what to do here. Like deal with like you need to do something about it. I mean, like okay, null being coerced in these specific instances is like sure, okay, but I don't think like it shows like it does expose a lot of bugs. And yes, it is if your code base is in a state and you go with the easy solution, which is going to hide bugs, instead of actually trying to address the issues in the code base, you are going to have a hard time. But most of the time, it's like if you are passing null around somewhere, it means that you are doing something fundamentally wrong. If you just like, I mean, like null has its own value, but if you're carrying a null value around and you're just actually providing it to functions which expect something to be a string, an integer, or something else, you shouldn't be using these functions because like there should be something wrong with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the search form has to be
Yeah.
so that you have question marks equals something.
Yeah.
If you don't put equals, then $_ plus
Yeah.
the framework should provide back a null. Because it's trying to show that it wasn't, let's say.
Yeah, which is reasonable.
Then developers print out each time. They sort of take that null from the missing query string, and it puts string entities to print it, and now you're going to have it blow up.
Well, yeah, because you are literally doing something wrong. Like if you don't have a query string, you're missing data. So the fact that it blows up tells you you are having a bug. I am.
You think of the front map developers actually using that what, 15% of developers?
I mean, I don't have data. The problem is like it's like the same thing as like I mean we can say like PHP like runs 75% of the 75% of the internet. We don't have proper data.
But I looked at the libraries to try and get a number of basically the number of files indexed by looking at the populations and how many include the asterisk types.
Yeah.
And I came up best 15%.
Yeah, because most of the time you don't need string types,
Yeah. Well,
which is my point.
people are more likely to do what I've been describing, but just passing values into HTML, string length,
Sure.
STR lower,
Yep.
and all those things. And you're, in that case, making it very strict at one case.
It's not in that one case. It's like it is like I understand what you mean. It's like yeah, obviously like just people were writing sloppy code, and the sloppy code is now biting them. But I don't really have any good answer to be than just like yeah, go fix your code. Like it's not a fun answer.
I guess the people wouldn't realise that is wrong because it's accepted for so long.
Yeah, but I mean, like, okay, like this, not my story from here, but so Sebastian, who writes PHP Unit, which I think everybody uses, or like a variation of it, if you use PES, PHP Unit is what is actually running all of the heavy lifting. But he did like various tweaks like that, where like fixing stuff or like fixing assertions, and people will come to him and be like, you broke my code, like my testers are now failing and everything, and telling like there's a bug. It's like there's a bug in PHP Unit. No, it turns out there's a bug in your code base. And like the fact that PHP Unit, or PHP in this case, is blowing up, should be an indication that like there is an issue with the code base. And I know like, yeah, nulls were just like for 25 years. PHP is what? 28 since last week? Like and for 25 years we like, null was like its own thing. But like, null being its own special value is something which has been known for like at least a decade. And that you can't treat null to be the same as an empty string, or 0, or false.
Can we perhaps?
Yeah, sorry.
We can, that's more a pub discussion, but yeah, like, I mean...
This might be. But no, it's. I think there's always this tension in PHP between these two sides.
Yeah.
Which will, yeah. And I think this tension's ongoing in a language like PHP, and will continue to go until one side gets rid of all.
I promise I don't bite. I did look like I was biting it. I promise I'm very nice.
So we've got any other questions? Then we've got a quick.
Yeah.
This will be a quick and simple one.
Okay, let's go.
You mentioned frameworks, and I've heard of Zen before. What are any others that you recommend? Frameworks?
I have never written a single PHP application in my life. I am not the person. I have no idea. I mean, people like Symfony, like Laravel. I mean, I've heard like about something completely different, which is like Gazelle, which is more functional Lisp basey in PHP, which is kind of looked kind of interesting.
What's that called?
Gazelle.
Gazelle.
it's completely different though. Like it's completely different compared to Laravel or Symfony. I don't know how Cake is doing. I just remember Cake from like 10 years ago.
Well, we might soon find out who are the Laravel, Symfony, and Cake experts. Actually, if there are any Cake experts.
Okay. But yeah, I don't have good framework recommendations. The only PHP I write is test code for the engine. I'm not a good like PHP developer. I know all of the weird cases. I don't know how to do like an OMM or stuff like that or a framework or it's this weird thing.
Well, the best way is to start learning it. But just I've got scripts that are 20 years old.
Yeah.
And they're still running. So
Yeah.
way back, PHP
4 or 3.
Whatever. But so I've got, so I know where everything is, and I just want to learn some basics. So lots of stuff out there didn't make sense as a whole, but there were lots of words I knew.
Yeah.
So I want to start learning how to piece this stuff together.
If you're going for a framework and you choose a Laravel and get on Laracast, that's probably the easiest way you can get to learn that framework.
I thought you were just saying framework's not so good. So
No. It's more like that's probably more a pub discussion than here.
There's probably more pubs, but can we first of all thank you very much for excellent talk. And regardless of whatever you think goes on in internals, this is an internals developer here. George.
Yeah, we'll go. Can I go back to the back?
Without people like you, we wouldn't have the language which predominantly we're all working in to
That's a lot of slides.
mortgages or rent. So I think a big round of applause for everyone else in internals.
I was planning on getting the foundation logo before, but I have too many slides.
Back at the start, isn't it?
Yeah, I should have put it. Nice.
Yeah. And
I should have taken my T-shirt.
PHP Foundation. And there is the PHP Foundation, so if your company is somehow profiting from
PHP as a language,
there's many ways you can support it. You can sponsor the meetup. You
Yes.
can give money to the PHP Foundation, or you can, through GitHub, ask your company to make sponsorship to people who maintain the open source software. So that's kind of 3 ways. There probably are others. And maybe when you're talking to your company, when it comes to your reviews or something, it's like, well, we're benefiting from PHP. How are you contributing back? Company could make 100 quid a month.
if you give more than 15,000 quid, which is a bunch of money, but not that much, you're probably going to be in the top 20, which is somewhat depressing. But so if you want to be like on the front page of like Open Collective, on our page, just probably like 20,000, like 20 grand will do it.
If you're looking for jobs and you've got 2 or 3 people, and you can't choose between them, then just say, well, look, how are you supporting open source? And I'll pick based on whether it was the best. If you're in that privileged position, you're kind of looking for, well, you've got many job offers, which might not be the case at the moment. So, anyway.
We're kind of going in a recession, but whatever.
But yeah, please in some way support, if you want to support PHP Southwest, get in touch and we can arrange some kind of sponsorship deals there.